Hi, everyone. Welcome to Well World TV. We have another episode of Lillian Live in New York City. We have a great guest tonight. We have Gabby Brown. She is a comedian here in New York City, and we know the world needs a lot of laughter these days. But can you imagine how she can be, creating laughter in this pandemic and even, virtually? So she's going to tell us all about it. She is awesome and funny and smart and creative. And without further ado, I'm going to announce Gabby Brown. And remember to like Well World TV on all your platforms. And without further ado, here she is. Hi, Gabby.
Oh, there I am. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here.
This is fantastic.
I'm so happy that you're here. Tell me, by the way, everybody, you could see down below, you can contact Gabby on Instagram at Hip Soccer Mom.
This is just the coolest thing, I think, that I can just be like down here, like.
Yeah, that's right. So tell me, how did you become so cool? I know your parents are really cool, but
by actively being uncool for many years.
Okay, I know, I understand. So you're a comedian. How long have you been a comedian, professional comedian, and how did that happen?
I'm just for start. I'm definitely more of an amateur comedian, but I've been doing comedy in a serious way, like on the open mic scene and getting to know other comedians in New York for, I want to say, about a year. I got into comedy maybe like 4 years ago, taking stand-up comedy classes at Caroline's on Broadway and doing improv at the People's Improv Theater. And basically I would just pick up whatever kind of like wacky creative project came my way with people I met. So I would be on improv teams. I would do kind of like, wacky 2-person improv. I would do stand-up on occasion. Mm-hmm. But I think the first time I really was like, okay, I want to start pursuing stand-up and hitting the open mics, X amount of times a week. I went in May to a women's and LGBT mic at Eastville Comedy Club with my friend Nick, and I was so nervous, and I was like, well, what if I bomb? And he was like, well, then we'll just do it again tomorrow. And I was like, okay. And I guess I didn't bomb, and it went fine, so I just kind of kept at it, and I've been doing it ever since.
How many people were in the audience that night, that first night you were there?
I want to say there were, open mics are generally like just other comics, and then sometimes a few people who think they're at like maybe tourists who think they're at kind of like a legit comedy show, like sprinkle in, and then it turns out they're at like an open mic where everyone's testing their, wildest material. So there were about 25 people overall, but everyone was super supportive because they were all, comedians as well, and a lot of women, like queer energy. And so I got to meet a lot of people through that, and, kept going back to that same mic, kept going to other mics. Usually about 25 to 30 people are at mics on average, I'd say.
Now, were you nervous?
Oh my God. Yeah. Yes. I'm a nervous person. Growing up in New York, I think does that to you. I think growing up Jewish also does that to you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For sure. But I don't know. It was just never like, I was never so nervous that I couldn't, like, I was always kind of like, what's the worst that can actually happen? Like, if people don't laugh, it's not like you murdered someone. Like, you just kind of keep doing it again, and it's just fun. No one's holding a gun to your head forcing you to do it. I think some comedians sometimes think that that's the case, but no, it's just fun. And the nerves are more from like, will people like me as a person? Like, will people see me and reject me personally, not necessarily my art? And you just kind of get over that because it's pretty rare that anyone's ever rejecting you as a person from a first viewing of you. Right. I think
it's more that they might not like the jokes or something, something like they might not agree or something, but it's not about you personally.
Yeah. It's the same with your show. I'm sure you're nervous every time you do a broadcast.
No, I'm not nervous
Really?
at all.
No, I didn't mean that in like a bad. I mean like you're putting yourself out there, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
Like,
God, yeah, thank you. By the way, on that note, I just want to mention we have a new studio, and my wonderful friend Shelby Brown, same last name as you, she
my
is
secret cousin.
yeah, maybe you're her distant cousin. She helped decorate the whole new studio. She designed it. She's actually a wedding planner and bridal gown wedding specialist. So she helped me. She has a good eye. We'll be interviewing her later on, down the road. But anyway, back to you, funny girl. How did you get the name Hip Soccer Mom? You're nothing, Mom.
I'm not very hip either. Yeah, it just came to me. I think I just I get told pretty often that I have camp counselor energy.
I could see that.
Right? It's pretty clear. I mean,
Totally.
I was a camp counselor for a couple of years, actually, and I still feel like I start half my stories with like back when I was a camp counselor. So it just sort of, I became this super, people started knowing me as this sort of soccer mom type, this like supportive on the sidelines, just being like, yeah, I'm so proud of you. And I think that just filtered into my energy. And when it came time to come up with a social media handle, I think this is probably one of my weak spots. I don't particularly care about branding, so I just wanted to make it something silly. So I just went with Hip Soccer Mom. It has nothing to do with my stage name, nothing to do with what I perform under, nothing to do with my interests. I'm not a big soccer fan, but it just kind of stuck.
And you don't think you're hip at all?
I think the definition of hip is very nebulous, and I also think that is exactly what someone who is not hip would say. So the jury is still out on that one.
Okay, that makes sense. So tell me, in normal times, where you're usually performing, what kinds of things, what are you performing? What's the material like?
Normal times, I would try and go to, I mean, comedians always say like 10 open mics a week. I think that's usually a lot. So I would go to between like 5 and 8 open mics a week and try and just like test out my material in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, different bars, different comedy clubs. I was supposed to have a residency at Broadway Comedy Club in July. I was going to be my first real time on like a professional. Well, I've been on a couple of pro shows before, actually, at Broadway Comedy Club, but that was supposed to be like my first time having a residency at a pro club, and that got shut down because of the pandemic. But other than that, like indie kind of bar shows. My friend Aaron Abelot Clemens, who's another really hilarious comedian, just really interesting and funny. He and I host this open mic called Anne Hathaway Presents, and now it's on Zoom, but for a while it was at the Pit, the People's Improv Theater, and it was in this tiny attic. Like, I'm talking like my room is bigger than the attic space. It was like this, I don't know, COVID is going to kill places like this attic. It's so small. Like, it was like, 15, 20 chairs just packed into a space like this big. And we had an open mic there every single Wednesday. And so those were a couple of the different places, just basically anywhere you can get a spot,
Right.
First year in comedy, just scrapping, trying to make connections and get spots where I can. So,
how have you had to adapt during this, strange time that we're all in?
Comedy wise, so when things shut down, Aaron and I pretty immediately were like, should we put the open mic on Zoom? And we said we were going to do it because it's just like, we were going to miss comedy too much, I think, if we didn't do it. So we put it on Zoom, and it's gotten a decent following every week. And it's basically just, you can do anything you want, really. People do characters, people do traditional stand-up. But because it's a different medium, people can also do like PowerPoint slides or things that you actually can't replicate live that you can do on Zoom or on a computer. So I think that's one of the ways I've started to adapt, is by trying to create shows and experiences that don't make you feel like you're just like yearning for something that's out of reach. Because live comedy is always going to be live comedy. And then like behind a computer, it's not going to hit exactly the same. It's going to feel like you're eating tofu when you want meat. But if you do things like my other comedy partner, Nick Cohen, and I started it, we did like a choose your own adventure show on Zoom. And that was one thing that you kind of can't really do in person. It's harder to, you don't have the visual aids. You don't have the mind map right in front of you for all of the different avenues. So there's a couple of different ways. I think everything in life is just like a lesson, and there's a couple of different ways you can take different lessons and make I almost said lemons out of lemonade. What's the other one?
Lemonade out of lemons.
Lemonade out of lemons, so to speak, with kind of the crappy situation that we're in. So that's how I've been trying to look at it.
And you know what I was thinking, you know, back in the day when we used to watch Seinfeld, I always wondered, like, you talk about those tourists that come in and were watching you before, and I don't know if your comedy has the New York thing in it, but I always wondered, like, do these out-of-towners, do they get it? If you're, you know, like, if you're going to be New York, like, maybe they don't get it, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, people, when they watch Seinfeld, if they're not from New York, they might not get it, you know, the takeout and the little apartments and things like that.
I think people have become accustomed to like New York and LA kind of stuff, because I feel like that's where most of the TV writers are from. What sometimes I've had a harder time adjusting with in terms of like tourists or people who filter in is like a lot of the comedy I've gotten accustomed to doing. It's sort of like very like queer and very out there and wacky, and like there's this singer I like, Sufjan Stevens. I think he's an amazing artist, and I referenced him. I made a mistake once at referencing him at one point during like a mainstream show where there were like a lot of, you know, tourists or like kind of bridge and tunnel crowd, New Jersey, and it was just like,
you got to explain bridge and tunnel, because people may be watching us from outside New York.
There's New York, and then there's New Jersey, and there's this it's one of those things that's hard to explain unless you're from New York. It's like you said, like it's like there's a kind of, there's like an alternative crowd, and then there's a mainstream crowd. It's so hard to explain, Lillian. It's like I don't know exactly how to.
I feel like a bridge and tunnel crowd is, there's your New York City, New York proper that live in New York City.
Right.
You know, we go out during the week, and then that bridge and tunnel are the people that are coming in from Long Island, from Queens.
Yes.
They're coming in, and they usually going out on the weekends, whereas the cool New York City crowd is going out during the week.
And pre-pandemic, they were the ones in the clubs, not just the comedy clubs, but like the clubs where people go for dancing. Just like, you know, it's not always this way, but sometimes at mainstream comedy clubs, there's like there's just a certain like raw energy where they want to hear about like, you know, domestic life and what's it like to have the wife and kids. And I just don't have that. You know, I'm a 26-year-old woman who like, I like to talk about like my cat and poetry, and you know, I'm kind of I try and be like as sweet as possible on stage. Sometimes I'm a little acerbic, but I don't always get super acerbic. I think people mistake that for weakness. They also mistake that for kindness, because I'm a gossip. So I don't know if I'm kind, but point is, I was on stage one time and I tried referencing this singer, Sufjan Stevens, in the sense of like, there was a stool on stage, and I was like, I'm going to sit on the stool because I'm like Sufjan Stevens. You could hear a pin drop. It was so quiet, like not a soul laughed. It was so horrible. And it was like, okay, this is how I have to adjust my material for people who didn't grow up exactly like me, who aren't from New York, who don't like indie music. Like, it's just a, you know, natural like thing you have to do. And I think I've done a pretty okay job since then, because I feel like from every bomb you learn. of adjusting my material to different crowds and doing different kind of jokes that are more universal. And I also think as you get better at comedy, which I wouldn't say I'm like great at comedy yet, I'm getting there. And as you get better, I think jokes do get more universal and funnier to everyone.
Yeah. When now when you are doing the Zoom comedy, I mean, I see it with Saturday Night Live. I see it with, a lot of talk shows. I feel bad for these hosts because they're just kind of like going at it alone. They don't have an audience to cheer them on. How does that work? Like, how do you get like psyched and how do you get feedback? You don't get in, or do you get instant feedback?
Well, there's a couple, you can seek out instant feedback. Like, for example, at the open mic I host, my co-host and I always say, like, you should keep your mic on unless you're like doing your dishes and it's going to make excess noise so that people can hear whether or not you're laughing. On Zoom, I mean, you can also like put it in grid mode to see if people are smiling, because that's a good way to gauge feedback on stage too, is like, maybe you won't be getting the most raucous laughs, but if people are smiling, that means they're listening. And if they're not listening, that means you're really messing it up. But I think the late night talk show hosts have a harder time than like I would, because I feel like Stephen Colbert is very famous and very used to having a large crowd who cheers him on at any given time. I'm used to open mics where like 5 different men are asleep in the corner, just like performing in front of like 4 beleaguered alcoholics. Like, I never get feedback anyway, so it's just fine for me.
So where would you, like, let's say this wasn't the pandemic, where would you go from here with what you're doing? Like, what would be a next step?
I would want to keep producing shows. This is a thing that happens in, or at least that I feel like I've seen happening amongst my comedy peers, is people being like, oh God, like, how do I get booked? How do I get booked? And it's like a very valid fear, but like, I just feel like I've been trying to like book myself because like I like just doing it and promoting shows and producing shows.
Yeah.
I think in a way every comedian is a producer, because every comedian has an opinion on the ways in which they would like to perform and the things they'd like to see in their spaces. So I'd probably just keep trying to put on shows and trying to like make interesting comedic art with my friends. Like, just mess around with like the really cool people I've met in comedy, like people from literally all different walks of life, and just keep meeting new people and keep collaborating.
Is there like a goal you have in mind of like where you'd like do you want to be in LA? Do you want, like, is there any kind of goal that
eventually I do want to move to LA, if anything, just because I have lived in New York my entire life. I mean, I'm such a local, and it's no different than people who never leave their hometowns in Florida or Connecticut. Everyone still knows everyone, and it's a mess. But I think I don't know if, I mean, I do want to like keep performing comedy and try all the different avenues that presents, but I really want to eventually like open my own performance space and just create an environment where young comics feel really empowered to keep going. I mean, and that's sort of like a 10 years down the line goal, because obviously I'm one of those young comics right now who a space like that would benefit. So in my journey doing comedy, I will see all of the different ways in which I inevitably fail and make mistakes. And I'll be like, I wonder if I had a space to mentor me, if I could have prevented that mistake. And
yeah, there's some famous places in LA and also in Chicago that my friends who are comedians, they've gone to, and I forgot the names, but they've been there, and it kind of like, train them, help them. What about like when you're, let's say, when you're out there, what do you do? Have you ever had a heckler or anybody like really annoying and disrupting you? What has happened there?
I think comedians, like, I feel like when I first started, like in my first like 3 performances, like doing comedy, I always was like, I have to prepare in case there's a heckler. But like in my stage of comedy, like that's all just like stuff you see on shows about comedians. Like what you really have to worry about is people just like not being asleep. Like, that's the heckler you have to worry about. When I did that pro show where I had an okay performance, I think I said something about myself being vanilla, and a man yelled, "No, strawberry," and I don't know what he meant. This day. So I don't even know if I mean, it was definitely a heckle, but he wasn't like, "Take off your shirt." You know, he was just saying something that didn't make any sense. And at some point you just like, I personally didn't have a response for it. I really admire some of the ways I've seen comedians shut down hecklers. I saw during a show I hosted, I saw this really funny comedian, Gara Lonning, like shut down these two hecklers, and they just said to these two guys, like, "I really love how you've made it the show about you," and everyone just immediately like got it, and these two guys just, you know, everyone laughed, it was good natured, but the guys just shut up, and I think that's probably the line you have to toe.
Yeah. So you never had to have somebody escort anybody out, or did you ever witness that with your peers?
I've witnessed, not with my peers, I've been in random comedy clubs where I witnessed, I don't know if it was hecklers. Oh, you know what? No, I did. I saw a heckler yell at a woman, "Take your shirt off," and he had to be escorted out. Luckily, it wasn't me. That's where I got that example from earlier. And I saw at one point an actual comic who was on stage. Usually it was a show, it was like a new talent showcase. So a lot of times with new talent, they get 5 minutes and then they get a light. And so that's when they're like, "Don't run the light." And she ran her light by 3 minutes, and she's clearly having a breakdown on stage. At one point, she started singing like "River Deep, Mountain High." Like, she was no longer doing jokes. Like, she would do a setup and then start another setup and then complete the punchline from her old setup. Like, like
wow.
2 minutes later. So she had to like, the host had to come on and be like, "Well, that's our time," and then she had to be escorted from the club. But I have not personally had to be like, because I'm not in an HBO show. Like, I haven't had to be like, "Take this person off the stage." I feel like that's one of those once in a lifetime things.
Well, it sounds like that guy that asked the woman to take her shirt if he was in the wrong club.
I don't know where he thought he was. I don't know what people think they're doing. Like, when they,
I don't know what people think they're doing when they walk out on the street.
I know. You ever get it in The Mask?
The Mask, yeah. It's what can you share something that's noteworthy during this time? Like anything, you know, and also how you're staying sharp while doing this in the quarantine?
Yes. Noteworthy in what way, if you don't mind me asking?
No, anything that stands out. Anything that stands out, one of your performances, anything, you know, that you can recall, "Oh, that was something special or noteworthy. I'll never forget that."
Sure. I did with my comedy partner Nick, we did an improvised Google Doc, which is when we streamed to Zoom, or just a Google document, and we wrote like improv scenes into this Google Doc that everyone could basically just read. And that was a lot of fun because, again, that's something that you absolutely could not do on stage. You would look like an insane person. So that was definitely something noteworthy. As for how I'm staying sharp, I mean, there's a couple of different like Zoom mics. There's this great mic called Fire Starters that's every Monday, hosted by Alex Kim and Divya Gurnesekaran. They're two really awesome comics based in New York and Brooklyn. And they have themes every week. So they have like gossip, the future, and that's really cool because it gives you kind of something as a jumping off point to write about. Usually I get a lot of my material from life, or from being at open mics. Like, creativity begets more creativity, but right now life is all the same. So all of my material is like, I'm inside. Yep.
Yeah.
Like,
same day.
Not much variety. So you have to push yourself a little. You have to give yourself mental prompts to keep going.
So what do you think makes there's a lot of talented people out there like yourself. And, what do you think makes somebody viable for that jump from, the comedian that keeps going to the local clubs and so on versus that comedian that jumps off and gets known?
I think listen, because I went to performing arts high school, I was around a lot of people who like came into fame and notoriety. Like there's luck is a huge element of it. If you have rich parents, you're just more likely.
Yeah.
There's a little
with a lot of things. That's with a lot of things, but yeah.
There's an element of talent, like you said, but talent only insofar as like you probably won't get somewhere if you like if there's something about you that like doesn't connect with people. Like everywhere else, like talent isn't as big of a indicator, I think. And then I think the people who I just see blow up are the people who like work really hard and want it really badly. And I don't, and I have a lot of thoughts around like what a famous comedian is versus not a famous comedian is. Like I personally am a comedian. I'm an amateur comedian, but the only thing that makes me a comedian is that I go to open mics in New York. That's it. And by that logic, like anyone can be a comedian because a comedian is someone who does comedy. But a like professional or known comedian, I guess, is someone who sometimes gets paid for comedy. But professional comedians often need other jobs because not a lot of places pay for gigs. Right. So it's complicated in that regard. But I think there's a lot of, in my personal opinion, like the amount of talented people doesn't mean competition. It means more people to collaborate with. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's a rosy perspective because I'm just in my first year, but I think if you're going to be competitive with people, it's morally bad. And it's also bad from a business standpoint, because if you're being bitchy to someone, you don't know if they're actually like really, if you're being rude to someone because you don't think that they're going to blow up one day, like you don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody has a crystal ball. So just if you're nice to people 100% of the time, you just raise your chances of like making famous friends. But that's only from a like business standpoint. Morally, everyone should just be nice to each other as well. But I was just saying, like, you can't reason with some of these people morally. But point is, I don't know if there's any one thing that makes a like comedian, but I think what makes comedians who blow up is like just a lot of ambition and desire and really wanting it.
Well, when you talk about being nice, there was a comedian who was an insult comic, and I loved her, and she was hysterical. She doesn't do it anymore, but she was an insult comic. So she wasn't nice.
I don't mean nice on stage. I mean, a lot of the comics who are the meanest on stage are like the nicest in real life. Like,
okay.
I don't mean like nice, and I mean like nice to people behind the scenes. But on stage, I mean, you can be as brutal as you want. Comedy, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Right. Now, do you think that you have to be funny to be a comedian?
No, definitely not.
Really?
I say that because I think many of my funniest friends, and I think most people whose heads aren't up their own asses would agree with this, are just like mechanics or accountants or like just people who in their day-to-day just like didn't think to pick up a mic and do comedy. I also think the desire to put yourself on stage is kind of like inherently unfunny because it's a little bit pick me. But there is a craft that you master in comedy, and it's like setup and punchline. And like some people like do that pretty well in their real life and make people laugh in their real life. And some people don't. I mean, you're hilarious. You're so funny. And I think I know comics who are less funny in their real lives than you probably are in your real life, but they're like funny on stage because they've mastered this act of like setup and punchline. And that's not a derisive thing. It's just that like the craft of comedy is a craft. Like it's like writing or acting or dancing or anything else.
Right. Well, Gabby, where can everybody see you perform? How can the people see you? I know we have the Instagram, the ticker tape, hip soccer mom, but
it's so cool.
Where else?
Well, Instagram's probably where you can get the most updates on when I'm doing my open mic or any shows. You can also follow at Anne Hathaway Presents. That is our mic because it's called Anne Hathaway Presents, based off of our love for the celebrity Anne Hathaway.
Okay.
And the Instagram, A Night of Funny Jokes, which is my variety show.
Okay.
And you can also follow me on Twitter, and that's not dash. What is the
underscore?
Underscore. Hip_soccer_mom.
You almost went off the screen.
I
did.
Oh. Yeah, just like following my Twitter all the way this way. But that's where you can find me. I'm just around, trying to still make the best of everything.
Well, that's awesome. Gabby, it was a pleasure to have you. I was, we're so happy to have you here. Thank you. And we are looking forward to seeing you. Oh, I don't know why I'm echoing. But anyway, we're looking forward to seeing you in all of your performances.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was such a blast.
Thank you. You're awesome.
You too.
Yeah. Well, good night, everyone. Keep tuning in to Well World TV, Lillian Live in New York City. We have some great episodes coming up with all different kinds of people, cool people. And have a great night. Take care.